So my name's Chris. I run the Unrelenting Hobby, which is a painting studio based in the UK. We're one of the biggest ones out there. We pride ourselves on ethical, transparent practices, make sure my painters are well looked after, being paid what they're owed, while also ensuring good customer service, great results over a quick time span for a good cost. I do a lot of social media stuff and cringy YouTube videos, which I hope help people to enable them to enjoy painting as much as me. I'm very much completion over perfection, so my stuff's done to a quick standard to look decent. I can't spend hours and hours and hours on one model to make it look absolutely fantastic, unlike...
I'm the opposite end of the spectrum. No, I'm just a bloke with an Instagram account. I don't even know why I'm here. So I'm Stu. I run Tesseract Minis, which is also a UK-based miniatures company. We have a bit of a weird origin story, because I started off very much like Chris. I was a commission painter painting armies for people. I hated it, and I never really knew why I hated it. And it turns out I had no idea that you could paint miniatures in any context other than armies. And then I started to become exposed to display painting, competitive painting, large-scale models, and the whole idea of isolating one single miniature from your collection and giving it far more effort than you might think it deserves. That turned into an entire business. I now teach people how to display paint miniatures, and actually one of the things that I specialise in is teaching people how to display paint miniatures without spending their entire life at the painting desk. We make brushes and we sell those. We've just recently started making miniatures. We released our first cast miniature this year, which is a 1:12 scale bust of a frog farmer, which is probably about as far removed from wargaming as you can possibly get. So I think really what we sort of batted back and forth between us was that a lot of what we're here to talk about today is how there is such a broad range to how you can approach miniature painting, how there is so much to it, and we sort of represent not opposite ends but such different parts of the field now that we're hoping that with a bit of sort of back and forth and Q&A with you guys, we can probably cover just about anything you might want to know about miniature painting. So
it all comes down to, why do we do it? So I'm not going to say Stu does it wrong. He's not going to say I do it wrong. We do it to the individuality of who we are as people. So we are going to do a little bit of customer audience interaction. So why do you paint? Why do you do this hobby as it's universally known?
Many reasons, really.
Yep.
One of it's to relax.
Yep, to relax.
Disassociate from the real world.
Switch off from everything out there.
For wargaming as well.
Yep.
Yep.
Wonderful. And anybody do it for other reasons? Do they do it just because they enjoy painting? Just because? Yeah, fantastic. Do they do it because they feel they have to just to get painted models on the table? Because the game is all about getting stuff on the table, looking good and fantastic. There is no right or wrong way in doing this bizarre, weird hobby that we all do. It is very much why you want to do it. I did a lot of time working for the other company down the road, and they have their own style, which has its own brand all around it.
Like the fact that you call it doing time.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. No, being a professional nerd is very much a sentence unto itself. But again, there's such a tremendous broad way of doing this hobby, and there is no set way to do it. There is no uncompromisable way for you to paint your own toy soldiers. I like doing things as fast as I can to look decent and on the table, and Stu likes to do things that look absolutely incredible in a more refined and condensed selection of models. And again, we are both in an extremely fortunate, in my opinion, position where we can do it for work.
Yes, it's the luckiest thing that can ever happen to be able to do the thing you love for a living.
100%. I always say it's never easy, but it's always worth it.
I'd really like to ask you guys as the audience a question that I tend to ask at the start of all my classes, actually. Do any of you do any other kind of art? By show of hands, who's into music? Who's into drawing? No. Photography? Any photographers in the room? Okay. So one of the things that I think really attracts me to miniature painting is I've been creative my entire life. The only things I've ever been good at professionally have been things that have required me to be creative. Before this, I was a chef. It's an incredibly creative job. It's also a very high pressure, high speed job. And I think that's sort of naturally what progressed into doing miniature painting professionally for me. But humans in general are drawn towards doing creative things. It's it's naturally a part of evolution. We evolved to create so that we could innovate. So the idea of when you sit down to paint, if you're painting for your army, if you're painting for a display shelf, if you're painting for a gift for someone you love, it's a very natural, normal thing to do. And I think that's sort of why Chris and I, you know, we sort of had a little bit of back and forth before this talk. And one of the things that we were very keen to not do is paint our two different fields in any way as being opposite or opposed to each other. Because the desire to sit down and paint something is the most normal thing a human can do. You know, we napped flint tools initially as a creative process until we realized they were useful. And, you know, that took us into metallurgy and into machinery, into the Industrial Revolution. But I do think it's very interesting that you tend to find with wargamers especially, the painting is a function. And something that I really like to try and get across to people is it doesn't have to be a thing that you do so that you can play your war games. The painting, you can dive as deep as you want into it, right? It can very much become its own completely separate hobby. I love Warlord games because I'm interested in predominantly World War II history, and that was what attracted me to Warlord. That was why I ended up on their radar in the first place. And when I'm presented with a massive army, the idea of what a World War II army looks like, it's anathema to me. It's the complete opposite of what I want to sit down and do. And then I realised, you can paint these little elite armies for Warlord games where you can put together, you know, I mean, my US late war bolt action force is 33, 34 infantry, a couple of tanks, a couple of weapons teams, you know. There's not a lot of miniatures. So even someone like me who has no interest in churning out mass numbers of models can find something in miniature painting. But then I look at like your displays, for example, and the volume that you can put out and still have everything so cohesive. I don't even understand how you do it.
I'm not human.
Is that what it is?
100%.
Right.
I mean, I'm from Derby, so a lot of people might think that anyway. But you know,
I wonder about that SIP digit.
The good side of the O'Brien Clough way, as I like to call it. Just makes me a good swimmer in that clean water of ours. So yeah, very much like Stu says, it's output's always an interesting term because output to me is a professional term. It's what we do for work. We've got KPIs, targets within our roles professionally. And when you start putting projects you love, hobbies you do to calm down, relax, downtime, switch off, disassociate, as someone said earlier, using terms like output can be quite snapping to that. However, when I do 350 models in a couple of weeks because someone needs them for a convention in America and their studio let them down, and I go, yep, cool, no problem, let's go. Why the bloody hell not? And then they're like, cool, here's the check, crack on. And I'm like, how am I going to do this? Oh, Jesus. And still be married by the end of it is the biggest obstacle. But again, it's, to me, painting is obviously something I adore. It's something I have adored in my professional career for about 20 years now. It's something I've done since I was 11 years old. And it's very much, ironically, what I do to switch off from painting is cook.
Yeah.
So again, it's that creative element and doing something tangible that you love and enjoy. So with army painting, I approach it probably very differently to Stu approaches his projects, or probably very similarly. You think about the end result you want, you think about the timescale you've got, the resources you've got, and what you want to utilise. So you think about, I choose 3 focal areas. So for things like bolt action, I look at it as an army, not individual models, an army. So 3 key points in an army. So a good example of that is the K-47 US Army I'm giving away today. Come and see us. I decided I wanted one of the biggest things about it to be its setting, which is going to be winter and forest. So lovely, thick, grassy woodland bases, all frosted up using some white paint. And the uniforms are all white with some pop colours of glowy plasma and some dark straps just to help contrast a little bit and draw the eye. The second is I want the theme of the army to be jump. So lots of guys zooming around with jump packs, fitting the narrative of the force, which in the Conflict 47 US starter set is perfect because that's literally what it is. I also want it to be done cohesively. So how am I going to draw these enormous walkers made out of metal and rift energy to be cohesive with the infantry? So the rift energy is the combining factor. I want those to be recognisable. So the jump infantry have the blue, the plasmatic glow on them. The mechs have the plasmatic glow on them, and then I try and ensure that the vehicles, and this works for Bolt Action or Conflict 47 or any game you have with vehicles or mechs or walkers with infantry, you want the mechs and the walkers to tie in with the bases, because 9 times out of 10 we're painting those to be camouflage, to fit in their setting. So I've done those to match the bases more than I have the infantry. And again, you can come and see those and ask me how I did them. I painted the whole box in 8 hours. I woke up Thursday morning and went, I'm going to do these. And then remembered I don't have any space for any more armies. I'm going to give them away. Why not? So there it is. Find 3 things on a project, whether that's one mini or an army of minis, that you want the focus to be on. And then from there, it's time management. Break it down. Are you going to do, let's say you do an hour an evening. I'm going to do 5 guys over the next 3 evenings, and then going to focus on the walkers and set a tangible deadline. We set the hardest deadlines on ourselves for things like events or games with pals. That's when we get stressed. That's when we fall out. That's when the back and forth in the group chats go and we start calling each other horrible things for not having stuff painted. But it's always coming back to it's a creative, tangible hobby that you should enjoy. The worst barriers are inflicted on us by ourselves. This isn't good enough. This isn't the best of my ability.
Yep. I
can't paint this week because I've got stuff going on at home. Cool. We're human. This is what happens. Don't be hard on yourself. And be positive, be productive, and in your friendship group or your gaming group, enable that with each other. Guys, I want to paint this much stuff by the next 3 weeks. Anybody else want to set themselves a goal? And make it casual and friendly. And then you can apply spice and banter and back and forth as you go, depending on your friendship group.
It's really interesting to me. You've touched on actually a couple of things there that are real sort of deep talking points for me in general.
Yeah.
And so one of the first things I want to just very quickly go back to, you made a point earlier about tying bases into models and camouflage. So for me as a display painter, that's actually one of the most unique challenges that attracts me to a game like Bolt Action. If you're painting, say, a sci-fi miniature in powered armor in an extremely bright color with extremely bright metallic trim, it's quite easy to make a really contrasting base and an overall very poppy piece that looks very complete as a finished piece. But wargaming miniatures for World War II scenarios and conflict even, which is still very World War II adjacent, present a very unique challenge because they're modern enough that the concept of camouflage is central to every army. There is really, other than a few select models here and there, very little on that battlefield that isn't trying to blend into that battlefield. And that gives some really interesting challenges for painters, right? Like, how do you make those tanks actually look big and imposing on a huge gaming board that's all the same colour as them? How do you make those infantry figures look quality, interesting, well painted when they're on bases that they're designed to blend into? Their uniforms are supposed to not stand out from those bases. So there's a lot of elements that go into creating painted pieces for these types of war games specifically that are really contrary to what we think as miniature painters is what we should be doing, right? How many times have you seen that bright blue power armored super soldier with that bright orange Martian crust base? It's iconic. Everyone that's touched a miniature knows what that looks like, even if they have no interest in the game that it's attached to. Whereas a bunch of blokes in green with some brown spots on them on a base that's covered in brown mud and green tufts, that's a different challenge. Things like that have really become my bread and butter as a display painter, solving those little puzzles. And that's another way that you can find really good motivation for getting your models painted, is going into that problem solving kind of mindset, trying to pick apart, what can I do that's going to make this interesting? What can I do that's going to make this mine? I talk in classes all the time, and it's a really artsy fartsy way of putting it, but I talk about artistic voice a lot in my classes. How do you identify yourself as an artist? And for someone who's pursuing display painting, that's quite an interesting topic. But for someone who's pursuing army painting, that equally could be a really good motivator, right? How do I make this army mine, yet still be historically accurate? Still be relevant to the lore of the game setting that it's in? One of the things that occurred to me when I was doing research for my late war US force, my first ever Warlord force, my first ever Bolt Action force, I started looking at uniform examples to try and get an idea. I didn't go looking for Googling, what paints do I use to paint my late war American bolt action army? Because what I'm going to get there is something that's designed for tabletop gaming, right? Something that's very repeatable, very uniform. The kind of thing that for you is probably bread and butter. It's like, these bottles of paint produce this look on a model. But for me as a display painter, I'm trained to look for reference. I'm trained to observe and replicate. So I have this puzzle to solve, right? I want this late war American army that's going to look really good. And I start looking for these uniforms so that I can observe and replicate. I do the thing that I've always done as an artist. And I see uniforms in museums that are completely different colours to uniforms in photographs, that are completely different colours to uniforms in movies, that are completely different colours to uniforms in print. And I say to myself...
There's that great example online, if you look up German Dunkelgrau, and it's like 10 jackets, all completely different colour, all the same colour.
There is no correct colour to paint your miniatures in. And that's a really interesting thing, right? Because now all of a sudden I can say, okay, so these tufts that I'm planning to use for this base, they're this really bright saturated green. Cool. So all my airborne guys are going to be in really muted colours then. Their uniforms are worn out, they've been at sea, they've been really, getting salt into their uniform, everything's really faded. Now I've got a look, now I've solved a problem. Suddenly I'm now motivated to paint. Suddenly I now want to push 30 models out the door, which for me is a lot of models. 30 for you?
Couple of days.
That's a Tuesday, right?
Couple of days. Yeah.
30 for me is months of work, But now suddenly I've got that motivation because I found something, I found a problem to solve. I found something to get my brain invested in painting this army. So that was one of the things that you said that really interested me.
Yep.
I think I might have forgotten what the second one was.
It must have been that good and cohesive and professional that it's just banked somewhere.
Yeah,
100%. Yeah, I'd like to encourage people. So I run my own workshops when I can. I've done time in other companies helping 22 8-year-olds learn how to paint toy soldiers and play the game. And that's, it takes its toll on you. The most important thing, and again, I've used the word already, is compromise. It's understanding the level you want to achieve, the time you want to do it, the products you have. And the most important couple of phrases to me are completion over perfection. You can paint something to the best of your ability, but I think to expect you to do that with every single thing you paint there afterwards, to continuously want to improve and strive, especially at volume, is how you burn out, how you fall out of love with the hobby, and how you take up golf. It's just not... I wouldn't wish that on anyone.
No one wants to take up golf.
No. We all work very hard in this day and age during these arduous times, and we do this to switch off and enjoy ourselves. So completion over perfection. And the other important phrase is, and this is coming from someone who gets paid to paint toy soldiers at volume, is that'll do.
Yeah.
What have you painted today? Oh, I've done the few layers. I've got some stuff down on the base. I've started the face. That'll do. It's not, I've still got to do this. I've got to get it done by this time. Setting unrealistic goals for ourselves is good for challenging ourselves and wanting to improve either in volume or quality, but never ever be afraid to say, that'll do. I've had a rough week at work. I've got a kid at home who's crying their eyes out. I need to focus on other things. That'll do. We are our own worst enemies, and it's amplified in this current day and age. And I'll try not to go off on tangents about this, but social media, for all its wonders, is tremendous. However, I know too many people who upload their work to social media, get 7 or 8 likes, and are so disheartened and so upset, or they look at something that Stu's done and think, I'm never going to be able to do that. What on earth am I doing wrong? Am I just not good enough? Am I just not, ever going to get to that standard? And I couldn't think of anything worse than comparing yourself to somebody and feeling worse about what you do, because comparison
reminded me of the point, by the way.
comparison is the thief of joy. And again, at the end of the day, we do this because we enjoy it, whether it's for historical accuracy or having stuff painted on the table or disassociating and switching off from the world. We don't need to be our own worst enemies about this hobby because it's fun and it's a good time. And I do that by using as few paints as I feasibly need to for cost reasons, and because the more paint you apply to a model in theory, the worse the result will get. I do it by, again, choosing your 3 focal points, whether that's one model or across an army, 3 areas where you want to put the focus onto. The rest of it might be some speed paints, a wash, maybe a dry brush, maybe a highlight. Otherwise, those 3 areas are where I'm going to do most of the effort. and there is another one after that, which I can't quite remember. So we'll let Stu jump in with his record point.
Two really scatterbrained commission painters doing a panel
It's
is
been
one
hot.
of the
It's been hot
worst
as well. I'm not going to
ideas.
lie. It's been hot and it's taken its toll on me.
So, yeah, the other thing that you touched on was like going back to that sort of point of that'll do, making things good enough. I want to say something not as a humble brag, to establish context. I entered 4 global level major painting competitions this year. And I got a clean sweep this year of gold medals. Every one of them, I took away a gold medal. One of them, every model I entered placed. I've had a really good year. And I'm really proud of that. But something that I don't get to talk about nearly enough, and that ties in really nicely to your point, I suffer from a behavioural condition. It's very well known and written about behavioural condition called attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, right? There's probably a few of you in the room that are either curious that you might have it, consider talking to your doctor about it. There's so much more known about it these days. It's quite common to either have it or know someone with it, or know someone who knows someone with it. You know, it's almost like the Dave of illnesses. I can't paint for really extended unbroken sessions. I also can't paint the same model day on, day on, day on, day on, day on. That's why I'm not built for army painting. That's why I don't do what you do.
When you say the same model, do you mean the same model replicated or one model?
Yeah, if I've got to do 5 identical models, that's pushing me to my limits.
Yeah.
I'm currently working on a squad of 10 models for like one of my old commission clients who I still have a bit of leftover work for, and I'm struggling to finish a squad of 10 models. I'm having a hard time with it. Good enough for me as a competition painter has a very different set of connotations, right? Because good enough for me, I'm not competing to beat the other people that show up to that competition. That's not why I go to competitions. That's not what I care about. I go to competitions because it's a really good way for me to be able to measure my own improvement against who I was as a painter the last time I went to a competition. And good enough for me might still involve putting some pretty serious time into a model. It might involve 15, 20 hours on a model, say. But in the world of competition painting, that's, 100, 200 hours is normal. So this is what I mean about the two types of painting that we do don't exist as opposites. Me trying my very, very best doesn't mean me dedicating 100 hours to one miniature. If you have a force that you want to really do your best on, if you have a miniature that you really want to do your best on, that doesn't mean you have to dedicate the rest of your life to painting that miniature. It doesn't mean that you have to be locked in the room with just that one model in front of you until it's perfect. Pick it up, put it down, walk away from it, paint 10 other projects before you pick it up again. Miniature painting should work for us as a hobby to relieve stress, to use up our spare time on something that we find relaxing. Most of us have such busy lives these days. A full-time job, looking after a home, you add those two things together, most of us maybe get 5 hours hobby time a week if we're lucky. That's actually something I polled my audience on social media last year, this was. And five hours came out to be the average in a week that most people get to spend on their hobbies. That's precious little time, right? And we shouldn't use it slaving away at something we don't enjoy. So to me, the secret to getting it done is exactly the same as it is for him. It's good enough. It's just my good enough's a different type of good enough. My good enough
Better than mine.
But the result isn't what's important.
Yeah.
The result, the fact that that model's good enough to get a medal at a competition doesn't make it better than your model.
Yeah.
It's, and I constantly say to my students that the best model you've ever painted is still the best model you've ever painted. It doesn't make a difference how good it is in the context of a competition. It's about what you put into it and what you got out of it.
Yep.
Right? And I think that sort of comes back to your points that you were talking about earlier with, how It is. It's key to kind of paint for relaxation, for an escape from the world. Grinding for me to get, 100, 200 models painted for the table, that isn't an escape from reality for me, because, that's still part of my job as well.
I bloody love it. I absolutely adore. If this table in front of me was covered in grey models, I would be salivating, thinking, "Yeah, I could get those done by Tuesday."
You'd have the mic like that, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
You'd be painting.
Exactly.
Yeah, panel. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
exactly. Like, what do you want? Come on. Yeah.
The only panels you do are panel lines.
Yes. Don't talk to me about panel liner. It's a filthy, naughty word to me. Yeah, and again, I don't want to say we're on a scale, because that implies variance one over the other, but spectrum.
Yeah.
It's a spectrum, and you can be anywhere in between that spectrum, and that is your bit, and that is where you find your solace and your enjoyment. The biggest barrier, and I think everyone will agree to this, is time. So like Stu says, his poll says his guys get an average of 5 hours a week to paint, and that should be precious and luxury and something you look forward to and want to commit to. Mine is about 40, 50 hours. And again, if I didn't love what I did, if I didn't treasure the idea of painting 40 Soviets in a couple of days, I'd be going insane. But it is my bread and butter for work, and it is what I love about this. I love the fact that I've got cabinets full of armies that never see play. But it's something tangible and physical that I can do. And the premise of, I woke up Thursday morning and wanted to paint that Conflict 47 army. By the afternoon, it was pretty much done apart from the bases because the glue was still drying. And that, to me, is peak. That's what it is for me.
That's inhuman to me. I literally can't imagine a world where I could do that.
I've tried. I remember once I got a character series model from another company, and I said, right, Chris, you're going to spend more than 8 hours on this model, and you're going to try and push yourself and do the best you can. And it got to 8 hours, and he was done, and I was going,
What do I do? Yeah, what do I do?
That'll do. He's fine. It's one of the best models I ever painted. I loved it. And I did another one immediately afterwards to almost an identical result, and I was still just as happy with that one. And I don't know, and again, it could be an ADHD undiagnosed thing, but the thought of spending more than 8 hours on a single model to me is anathema. I couldn't.
Just couldn't do it.
Couldn't. Regardless of how big it is, I will look at something and think, 8 hours, watch this, let's crack on.
Out of interest, has anyone in the room competed with their painting? Has anyone ever submitted anything to a painting competition?
Yeah, the 10-minute speed paint next door.
It counts.
Yeah.
It counts.
100%.
So, I had a really interesting... So, one of the things that we do as part of my tuition services is I'll have people that are trying to either get into competition or improve their results at competition who will have feedback sessions with me. And a student a couple of weeks ago in a feedback session, we were talking about sort of what he can do to improve and how we could kind of optimize his process to get a bit of a better model out the other end of it. And so the really interesting thing was I actually thought this guy was a better painter than me. I liked his miniatures more than mine. And so I was kind of trying to navigate imposter syndrome at the same time as I'm having this conversation with this guy, right? He's paid me to teach him how to improve his competition painting, and I think he's a better painter than me. How am I supposed to do that? And what it actually ended up coming down to, and it was a real breakthrough moment for him as well, was we started having a conversation about what is the difference between the model that gets the gold and the model that's the runner-up. And the thing that we settled on was actually most of that extra time, most of that, past that 8 hours of initially blocking the colours in, getting the light how you want it, you know, most of that extra time is just how committed are you to fixing your mistakes? How much are you willing to hunt down every little minor problem with that model and do whatever it takes to make that problem disappear? And actually, it turns out that a lot of the highest level competition painters, I started asking people about this, and a lot of them agree that what really comes down to those breathtaking, you know, world-shatteringly beautiful miniatures was that they had a solid idea to start with. They roughed it all in pretty quickly, just like a normal painting session, and then they just nickel and dimed it for months and months and months and just sat there making micro corrections, pushing pixels, tiny little adjustments here and there. And that's quite interesting, right? Because a lot of us think that competition painting is unattainable. A lot of us look at Golden Demon winners and we say to ourselves, how is that possible? How can it be done? And actually, it turns out, for a lot of these master painters, the secret is that they're just willing to spend more time fussing over it. They're just willing to put it down, walk away, and pick it up again the next day and do some more, right? So there's a lot to be said for how that can translate into getting an army painted. There's a lot to be said for how that can translate to actually making your painting experience more enjoyable. You know, if painting is for you, like me, something that you got into as a release, as a mental health break, as something to benefit yourself, then there's a hell of a lot to be gained by finding ways to satisfy that outcome, right? If you want your miniatures to be better, go back to one of your completed miniatures. Go back to something that you finished a year ago. Pick it back up and say, what more can I actually do on this? Because you've got a year more of practice now. You're a year's worth of better painter now. You might well pick up that miniature and say, oh no, I've easily got another 4 hours on this. No problem. I can fix this, I can fix this, I can change that. I can push that highlight further, I can make that blend smoother. There's that satisfaction of the best model you ever painted. It was a model you painted a year ago, and you might have thought it was rubbish at the time, but it could be your new best model you've ever painted because you just gave it some time, came back to it. You're a more practiced painter now. You know, so little of high-end painting is precision, brush control, all of these things that we think are only obtainable through grinding. So much of high-level painting is just having a good idea and being committed to it, being committed to following through on it.
Yep.
And I think that's why it's so important to not make it something that's separate from army painting, something that exists in a different world.
Yeah.
Because what our models start exactly the same as your models.
Yep.
That first 8-hour push to get that model looking nice and tasty, if it's a character model, if it's a rank and file model, maybe 2 hours a man, 3 hours a man tops. And then it's all the refining stages.
Yeah.
Then it's all the commitment, the coming back to it.
No. No. And again, it's we're going to come to questions in a minute. I promise. We'll stop yammering.
We'll give you first question.
Yeah. And everything that Stu said there is completely valid. And there are people who I hope are listening to that today thinking, yep, no, that's great. That's really enlightened me. It's really helping me set my own expectations. But when I look at the stuff Stu does, and I look at, the Golden Demons and the stuff that's out there like Fen Molisher and stuff like that, I'm not going to be arrogant and sit here and think, I could do that if I did the practice. I could do that if I knuckled down a little tune.
I think you could.
I could do that if I spent a week at Stu's boot camp, sharing his dressing gown. I simply have zero desire to get to that level.
Yeah.
I can appreciate it. I can admire it. I can commend the people who do it and dedicate their time to it. I simply have no desire to get to that level and push myself to that boundary because I enjoy army painting. I enjoy painting as many models as fast as I can to a decent standard. That's what ticks my boxes.
Found your lane.
Yeah, exactly. And at some point, I could vary and break away from there. But I've not only found an element of the hobby that I absolutely adore doing for myself, I've managed to make a career out of it, and I'm supporting people to do that in their own careers. And that, to me, tells me I'm doing what I like to do.
So I guess ultimately, that's really what this talk is about, right?
Yeah.
We are, from the outside, what you would view as two very opposite painters. But what we both did in our own different ways is find our lane, pursue what satisfies us in painting, makes painting rewarding for us as individuals, and built careers out of that. And we've both been successful in our relative ways doing that. And so now what we try to do is pass it on to other people. So if what's relevant to you, what satisfies you is that army painting, this guy's a fountain of knowledge and he can tell you so much that you could ever dream about knowing.
And I give it away for free. I don't agree. I don't agree with this paid paywall gatekeeping stuff around sharing techniques. My business model is ethics and transparency. You know how much we charge. You know what our prices are. You know what our standards are. I sell my hobby to people at the standard I'd be happy with. So if someone says, Chris, I want a Golden Demon level winning model painting, not my basket, go and see Stu, go see somebody else. And again, it's knowing where your lane is, where you're happy to do it, and not trying to break that for the reason of self-pursuit or to self-improve unless you're willing to commit to that, which I'm not.
Questions?
Q&A, guys.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, it's sort of two related things, but do you think people kind of move between the two ends as they like progress to their career or hobby career? And do you think one supports the other? So if I want to get better at commission, like at your thing, I'll go and bang out 2 armies to just get the numbers and the reps in, and then the other way around, I'll spend 10 hours painting a model, so then I get better or faster at doing some of the more like brush control things.
Yeah, I mean, it's all reps,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't matter how you're painting. If you're painting and painting consistently, you're improving. There definitely is such a thing as bad practice, right?
The more you do something, naturally, the better you get, and it's recognizing your habits. So the third point I forgot to mention earlier, which I've remembered, is products over techniques. So I'm sure Stu's got a bank of techniques that are incredible for letting him do what he needs to do. For me, it's literally what products can help me achieve the best results with the minimum effort.
I am literally the direct opposite. Yeah.
And
what techniques can minimize the number of products I need?
yeah, and for a lot of that is speed paints and contrast paints, which some people think is absolute cancer to what we do and want nothing to do with it. For me, if I can get away with putting a black speed paint on someone's boots and that's it for that model, so be it. If someone picks my model up and says, you've not highlighted the straps on that boot, I will simply ask if they would like to meet in a car park. It's not a problem. And again, it's managing those expectations to know what my hobby is and what other people want. If I'm being paid to paint someone's stuff and they say, I want 3 colours on every boot lace, that's not the job for me. So yeah, bad habits is a funny term because that implies to me that you're doing things inherently wrong. It's more, the more you do something, the better you get. Each time you pick up that brush, you are getting better. But the other side of that is, as Stu was saying, something you painted a year ago isn't going to look as good as something you painted the next year, which is why I'll do a Soviet army in January, and I'll do another Soviet army in December and think, that's amazing.
I'll
Bye.
do a
See you in a bit.
Soviet in January.
Yes.
And then another Soviet.
Yeah, and again, it's the scale. So I'd say if you want to, finding the compromise between army painting and high-end painting is amazing. If you can find that perfect centre line, incredible. If you want to get better at speed, focus on army painting. If you want to get better at refined solo piece painting, pick a centerpiece and work on techniques around that.
The one doesn't necessarily help the other, really, does it?
Yeah, I would say it can
I
purely
use speed
because the more you use a product or the more you try different products and then find the ones that suit you and the ones you like, naturally your output will improve and your quality will improve. And again, some people swear by one brand of paint, some people swear exclusively to one brand of paint. And again, I can't understand that. I'll see something come out and think, oh, that's cool. What's this AK panel liner all about? Sweet Lord Jesus, how did I exist without this in my adult life? And again, it's being willing to try new things and not pigeonholing yourself in, I want to paint to this style, while also expanding my own abilities.
Yeah. I think, when we're talking about, like, the point that you made about speed paints, like, if you're doing a bunch of stuff in speed paint, would it help you achieve what I do? And I said to you, I use speed paints, and you were sort of quite surprised for a second there. It's a really good example of how the overlap always occurs in places that you don't expect it to. Mm-hmm. So for me, I have a set of acrylic inks and different mediums, right? Because I want to reduce the number of products that I have. So if I need a speed paint, I'll get a speed paint medium and I will mix the acrylic inks for the color that I want. And if I've got to do like 100 models with it, obviously I wouldn't take a commission for that these days. But if
Give us a shout, mate.
If I have to do that, then I would just mix enough of that I could decant into some bottles, and then I've got some bottles of that color mixed, right? But I want control. That's the difference. I want the exact control. So I will still use a speed paint, but all I'm buying is the medium, and I'm mixing acrylic inks into it, so I get the exact color I want. Washes. Often it'll be the same thing. A lot of the time, if I'm looking for a wash, I'll just grab a medium, grab some black ink, for example. That's my gun wash, for dulling down my metallics. So it's not necessarily that techniques and products change, it's how you approach them that often changes. It's building that toolbox of, I'd rather leverage my knowledge and my ability with my eyes to create my consistency. And admittedly, it doesn't always go right. Whereas, you'd rather have a catalogue of things that you can rely on, right? Things that you're tried and tested and you know what they are, and there's no guesswork involved.
So, yeah, and again, that applies now to, whereas Stu might look at an individual piece and apply a unique system to that using the brands and the techniques he's familiar with, I will look at armies and I will say, bolt action army, Zenithal white spray can, so black all over, then a Zenithal white, speed paint for the uniform, acrylic for the helmet, speed paint for the face, speed paint for the boots, metal acrylics for the gun, panel liner for the gun. Make sure you've got your base decided before you go from there. And using what could be 5 to 10 paints, I can do an entire army in a couple of days. And that is because I refine my process purely by what products am I using to get the best results I need to as fast as I can.
Whereas on my side of it, I mix everything.
Yeah.
And, you know.
And it looks incredible.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I have a class that we're touring at the moment where we paint a bust with 9 paints.
Yeah.
Mixing everything can definitely lead to you using far fewer paints.
Yeah.
Right? It can. And the point of that class and the reason that we're touring it is because it's to help people build confidence in mixing and understanding what broader gamut of colours you can get from a narrow amount of paint. But at the same time, it's not good for consistency because you have to really depend on your eye. If you've got a good eye, sure, but most of us don't have a good enough eye to be able to paint an entire army mixing on the fly every time.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
One for Chris.
Hello, mate.
What's the biggest project you've ever done in one go, in terms of miniatures?
For another Nottingham-based company, it was the one I mentioned earlier, 350 models over 2 weeks. It was 4 of the new sci-fi game starter boxes with 2 armies in each, 2 of their fantasy equivalent, and then a massive load of green fungoid monsters of about 50 models. And that was done with building over 2 weeks.
I actually realised Paul Smith did miniatures.
And is it the best stuff I've ever painted? Hell no. Was the brief, we need them done in 2 weeks to go to the States. For the love of God, please help us. Not a problem. But doing that again, it humbles me because it shows me my wife loves me very much. She sacrificed the kitchen table because I'm not painting 350 models in 35-degree heat when my studio is 40 degrees. It ain't happening. So the kitchen table surrendered. Was that 5 minutes? Cool. But it enabled me to think, yes, I can do 350 miniatures over 2 weeks. There was a time just before that I was really worried that I was burning out and I was losing my flow. But when a company says, name your price and to do this, and they say yes, I'd like a new bathroom. Thank you very much.
The sense of pride finishing a project like that 100%. As well.
And the fact I handed it over to someone in person at this company, and they're like, this is amazing. And again, I try not to be arrogant in what I do. I said to them, you will not find another place that can do this many models to the quality you want in the time given. And then they said yes, and then I was trying to figure out how I was going to do it. But I did it, and I was really proud of that. That's probably one of the biggest jobs I've done. But again, I average about 100 models a week doing jobs, doing my own bits. The conflict army I did on Thursday because I wanted to do it. And again, it's understanding that, is this going to be the best looking army in the world? No. Is it going to look great for the time I put into it? 100%.